Hey everyone, Grayson here from Based Theory. I have here with me today Redefine Living, Sam. And so we've had a previous discussion that's actually one of my most viewed live streams. And so yeah, I'll just kind of let Sam introduce himself and take it away.
My name's Sam. I think most of your fans are also my fans. But um, yeah, no. We tried to join. We've had conversations a little bit in the chat, and I tried to join your stream and talk about it, but there was a lot going on, and I
Yeah.
wasn't trying to compete. So basically, where I believe the disagreement is, if I lose my signal a little bit, then I might just shut my camera off. But
Okay, that's
um,
fine.
so when it comes to any fact, okay, and that fact would be the fact of like the geological column, for example. Those facts are going to be interpreted based on one's worldview. And so this is something that we should disagree on. Or this is something that we should agree on.
Yeah.
And
So
so that's
I
how we're
will
going
agree
to
with
come.
that. And I think I re-listened to our previous conversation, and I think that one thing maybe that I think maybe was deserving clarification was you kept accusing me of begging the question. And so I wanted to make sure, like, are you saying that my inclination towards a naturalist worldview, where I would look at evidence and I would look for a natural explanation for them, is that where what you're talking about with my interpretation, my worldview of interpretation of the evidence?
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me just unpack it for like a minute,
Okay.
and then and maybe I'll clarify that question. Okay, so you can have, it's almost like two paradigms, So for example, we kind of use and I don't like using analogies because they can get ripped apart pretty easily. But let's say, in astronomy, somebody might hold to a steady state theory, and somebody might hold to a Big Bang theory. And so we can say, for this analogy, those would be their starting presuppositions, and they would be interpreting the data accordingly. So they might both look and see a red shift. So they see this fact that is a red shift, but they might interpret that red shift differently. Someone might
Mhm.
say, well, I'm interpreting this red shift as an expansion, which that would be the consensus opinion. However, somebody might say, well, no, I'm going to interpret this red shift differently, which there are people that interpret that red shift differently. It isn't necessarily an expansion. So you have the fact of the red shift being interpreted by one's worldview. Okay.
Okay.
So and we would agree on this. Hopefully, if you don't agree yet, it's just because maybe you're not understanding what I'm saying. But this isn't something that's really controversial.
No,
So
I'm with you so far. The only comment that I would have to say about that is that the evidence, right, the evidence that is available can be more in line with one interpretation versus the other. Like I would say that in that example, the current preponderance of the evidence, like the totality of the evidence that we have available to us to make the decision, is in favor of one interpretation, namely the expansion model, uh, versus the other, the steady state. So even though we can look at how we would interpret the evidence given a steady state assumption, given a steady state worldview, the evidence is clearly in line with one interpretation over the other. Not all interpretations are equal. That's the only comment that I would have so far.
So, in the context of a worldview, the comment you just made would be arbitrary. And so, I would go one step further. Okay, I would say, in the context of a worldview, all of your evidence is going to be in alignment with your worldview because you're interpreting it that way. Right? So
I don't
you would
know if
say everything is evidence of interpretation A, and somebody else might say, well, I believe everything is an evidence of interpretation B, or maybe they would say not A, depending on how we're going to look at it.
sure.
Okay.
But I don't think that those two interpretations are of equal value. So to give an example here,
But that's
like
but what
wait, can I give an example real quick just to clarify what I'm talking about? Like if the evidence that we are both looking at, say somebody like drops an apple in front of us and we both watch the apple fall, then if my interpretation is to say um, that was because of gravity, And here are the testable predictions for if that's the case. Here are the equations, here are the formulas that predict mathematically what we should observe. And then the other person's explanation next to me is that no, actually, I think that those are invisible fairies that are pulling down the apple. And really, all of the observations are in line with that. You can't disprove that there are some kind of intangible, invisible fairies that are pulling down things instead of gravity.
Yeah.
And clearly, like, I can't falsify that with the evidence. The evidence shows gravity, right? And they can accommodate that, like, they can accommodate all the evidence in the invisible fairy worldview. But that doesn't mean that they're actually making testable, verifiable predictions. And that doesn't mean that the empirical evidence suggests that there are invisible dark fairies just because it can be accommodated by that worldview. I would
Try
say
to
that
be brief.
clearly in that example, those two interpretations are not of equal value.
Okay. So I get what you're trying to do with the invisible fairy. Okay. And that's cute, but that's not going to work because, I can make comments like that too and point out, depending on the worldview, maybe those invisible fairies would be these non-physical laws that are governing the physical creation if they can't be accounted for, right? So maybe that would be the invisible fairy. The problem with what you're saying is if we're going to be more intellectually honest, Newton had certain equations that Einstein corrected, right? So to say that, well, I have this conclusion in science and it's definitive, well, that's pseudoscience. Okay, because all
No,
conclusions.
okay, hold on.
Hold on. I let you go. Let's be charitable.
Okay.
Okay. Conclusions in science are provisional. And the reason why you shouldn't disagree with this is because Darwin challenged the consensus. Darwin viewed the geological column through a
Okay.
naturalistic
Can we
lens.
just hold on now?
Let me finish my thought.
I know, but you've made your point that scientific knowledge is provisional, and I agree with that. None of these claims are going to be absolutes. They're all going to be provisional.
Yeah. So to suggest that one person has, and I agree that there is a sense where if somebody's coming along and they're just like maybe too fringe. I get that. Okay. But in the context of a worldview, everything is going to be interpreted from those starting presuppositions. So for you to say, well, I have a naturalistic worldview and I interpret the data this way, and for these reasons, I think that it's best and everything is best explained within my model. If we're going to be honest with each other, then I can jump in your model and I could say, okay, I see why you would say that. I would make that would make sense. But on the other hand, you would be doing the same thing from an internal critique, or what's called a reductio ad absurdum, where you would accept your opponent's position for the sake of argument, even though you disagree, and you would jump in and see if you can if everything is internally consistent. Okay. So over here on this other model, as a biblical creationist, we have a worldview, we have those starting presuppositions. And the reason why these are important to understand this, because like you're a smart guy, but sometimes you say stuff that just kind of misses this whole point. The foundation of science is philosophical at the most root level, unless you want to say that like rocks talk. That would be a reification fallacy. That's not the case. At the most fundamental level, there are starting presuppositions. So I can grant you your entire worldview. Okay. So at this point, let me hold on one second. I just had all this leftover corned beef and cabbage from last night, and I'm not. So at this point, like I understand that you're used to debating over the interpretation of the data, right? And you're good at it. You do a really good job with it. You do that with Donnie. You guys debate, say, hey, there's this fact, and I have reasons why I should interpret it this way. And he's like, well, no, I have reasons why I should interpret it that way. I'm coming at it at a deeper level. Okay. I'm granting you your interpretation of the data. I'm saying you have a naturalistic worldview. Okay. And in your worldview, you're not allowing for any non-naturalistic interpretation of the data. Okay. So I can be an atheist now and an evolutionist asking you these questions. So at a fundamental level, the implications of your worldview, what it entails, like if I say my favorite color is red, the entailment is that it's not blue, it's not green. Does that make sense? Do you agree with me? If I affirm my favorite color is red, I have explicitly said my favorite color is red. So,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I've also implied that it's not blue,
Yeah,
and I've also implied that it's not green. Okay.
sure.
So you have a naturalistic interpretation, and the implications of your worldview interpretation of the data is that there is no God.